Welcome to my channel. Grounded, disgraced, forgotten. That's what they called Captain Eliza Reyes after she broke orders to save lives. But when two generals were captured and every rescue attempt failed, she was the only pilot reckless and brilliant, enough to thread her jet through a canyon no one else dared. This isn't just a story about flying. It's about rewriting the rules of war. 3 weeks. That's how long I'd been stuck on the sidelines, watching from the observation deck while the others launched into the skies. My jet sat cold in Hangar 3, hidden behind tarps like a forgotten relic. I'd flown that aircraft in more sorties than I could count, but now I wasn't even cleared to sweep the runway. "Captain Reyes," Colonel Doyle had said, voice sharp as a scalpel, "you're grounded indefinitely." The words still echoed. My name is Isabel Reyes, and up until I broke protocol, I held the top flight record in my entire wing. The move that got me sidelined had saved 12 trapped soldiers in Yemen, but it also violated direct orders. To them, it didn't matter that those men were breathing because of my call. All they saw was disobedience. Risk. My boots tapped softly against the concrete balcony of Fort Vega's main flight tower in San Diego, overlooking the launch field. F-35s tore through the sky in perfect V formations. On the tarmac, crews moved like clockwork, fueling, inspecting, double-checking. Order. Precision. That world was mine, once. "Brought you this before it got cold," came a familiar voice. Lieutenant Cara Monroe handed me a coffee without waiting for a thank you. Don't say I never do anything nice. I took it, nodding. "Appreciate it." She leaned against the railing beside me. "You know, some of us think what you did was the right call." I smirked without humor. Try telling that to Doyle. Already did. Doesn't change much. She wasn't wrong. I'd run the whole mission through my head so many times I could narrate it backwards. What was supposed to be a low-contact recon op for Bravo team had turned into a full-on ambush. They were pinned, no cover, high ground lost to insurgents. Artillery was 20 minutes out. They wouldn't have lasted 5. I broke off my patrol route, dropped into a vertical dive, low, fast, nearly skimming the rocks. Used the F-35's targeting to surgically wipe the enemy out before they even registered I was there. 12 men made it out, but I'd gone rogue to do it. "Reyes," a voice snapped me from the memory. Staff Sergeant Beck jogged up the stairs, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Colonel Doyle wants you in ops briefing. Now." I blinked. "He knows I'm grounded, right? He said specifically to bring you." Kara's eyebrows rose. "Guess they're changing the rules." I tossed my coffee aside and followed Beck toward the ops center. The air inside buzzed with urgency. Mission planners, intel analysts, senior pilots, everyone was there. Not routine, not a drill. Colonel Doyle stood front and center, grim-faced, a digital map of northern Afghanistan glowing behind him. At 0422 hours, he began without ceremony. A diplomatic convoy was hit while moving through the Salong Pass. 2 high-value targets captured: General Eleanor McBride, Chair of Joint Operations, and General Patrick Lowell, NATO Command. The room stilled. The screen zoomed in on a jagged mountain range lit up in red. "They're being held here," Doyle continued. "A fortified compound. Natural ridgelines, choke points, hardened defense. Initial rescue attempts failed. We've already lost 1 jet and 2 helicopters. Anti-air defenses are heavier than we expected. We've got 1 window before they're moved." I watched the map, already seeing the impossible angles, the lockdown routes. Every standard approach was a death sentence. Major Sloan, the squadron vet, raised a hand. "Sir, are we going in heavy? Or is this surgical?" "Rescue, not elimination," Doyle replied. "But the path in is sealed. Conventional flight patterns are being shredded." I raised my voice before I could stop myself. "What about a non-linear canyon run? Mask the approach through terrain, strike before they even clock us?" Silence. Doyle stared at me. "You're not cleared to speak," Sloan muttered under his breath. But Doyle didn't silence me. Instead, he pointed to the map. "Go on. If we drop below radar and cut through the Sharik Gorge here," I gestured at a narrow slit of terrain, "we can come in under their defensive net. But it's tight. One mistake, and that jet becomes confetti." "You'd have to fly that gorge nearly blind," Sloan countered. "Supersonic turns with less than 10 meters clearance." I've done worse, I said flatly. Doyle studied me for a long beat. Captain Reyes, step outside. I followed him into the hall. He closed the door behind us. That stunt in Yemen, he said, quieter now. You really believe you had no other choice? I didn't hesitate. No hesitation then. No hesitation now. I saved those lives, sir. And if I greenlight this run and you fail, those generals die. I nodded. Then at least someone tried. Sir. He turned the doorknob, pausing. You've got 15 minutes. Go get your jet. 15 minutes. That's what I had to review the op specs, memorize the terrain, and walk back into a cockpit I hadn't touched in 3 weeks. Back in Hangar 3, the tarps were off. The mechanics were already crawling over my F-35, checking connections, loading payloads, running diagnostics like their lives depended on it, which, in a way, they did. Chief Engineer Tucker met me at the nose. We tuned the sensors to your preferences. Twin pods locked with guided dams. Calibrated for precision under 800 feet. I ran my fingers along the fuselage. It was like meeting an old friend after a silent falling out. Everything felt familiar. Everything felt right. Systems clean? I asked. She's ready to make up for lost time. Tucker replied with a tight nod. I climbed into the cockpit. My gloves touched the throttle and stick with reverence. No hesitation. No second guessing. The HUD flickered to life. Targeting arrays, fuel systems, radar sweep, terrain maps. All green. This was home. Tower. This is Raven 1 requesting clearance for immediate departure. I said, using the call sign I hadn't uttered since the grounding. Raven 1, cleared for launch. Good luck, Captain Reyes. The wheels left the runway with a familiar surge of power. The roar beneath me was freedom and fear in equal measure. Ahead of me, Afghanistan. Below me, about 30 years of politics, strategy, and chain of command that I was about to cut through like a blade. The 2-hour flight was quiet, except for the constant stream of data updates from Overwatch. Raven 1, be advised. The voice came through, firm and fast. Enemy has upgraded SAM coverage. A new launcher just came online along the northern approach. Copy. I won't be taking the northern approach. Understood. You are now 5 minutes from initial descent vector. I banked left, nose dropping fast as I dropped altitude. 7,000, 5,000, 1,000. The ridges loomed ahead, jagged like broken teeth. Shadows fell deep into the canyons, but I'd studied every inch of the route. Sharik Gorge, 30 meters wide in parts, tighter in others. One miscalculation, and I'd be a fireball in stone. The terrain masked me from radar, but it also left no room for correction. I was flying on instinct, feel, and 1,000 invisible equations whispered between throttle, pitch, and pulse. Raven 1, you are entering target zone, Overwatch said. Defense is still hot. Proceed with caution. I didn't reply. I couldn't afford to think. I dove into the canyon like a bullet fired through a tunnel. Rock blurred past the wingtips. Every second, the aircraft screamed for correction, for restraint. I gave it none. We raced through the mountain's veins until the compound rose like a fortress carved from Earth itself. The SAM sites never saw me coming. 3 strikes, 2 seconds apart, clean, coordinated, ruthless. Explosions tore through the launchers just as the enemy began to pivot. Their counterattack would be fast, but I wasn't finished. Overwatch, Raven 1. Defenses neutralized. Moving to Phase 2. Copy, Raven. Extraction units are en route. In the center of the compound, 2 heat signatures showed up on scan, alive, stationary. The generals, guarded but not moved yet. I triggered the recon sweep. Hostiles ringed the building. Movement was chaotic, some still stunned from the first strike, others rushing to seal entry points. I mapped the engagement zones, marked every defender I could identify, and began surgical strikes one by one. Buildings shook. Barricades cracked. My rounds landed like exclamation points in a sentence they never got to finish. Then the radio cracked again. Rescue 1 reporting. Inbound for extraction. Confirm safe corridor. Confirmed, I said. I'm clearing the last perimeter now. The extraction choppers swept in low and fast. From above, I watched the assault team breach, smoke grenades blooming below as they retrieved the generals. Enemy reinforcements began pushing toward the compound, but I was ready. I fired controlled bursts along the valley's choke points, forcing enemy vehicles to scatter. The rescue team loaded the targets and took off within 2 minutes. Overwatch, Rescue 1. Both packages secured. RTB in progress. Copy. Raven 1, escort confirmed. The sky, for a moment, was mine. As I pulled up and out of the gorge, the compound shrinking beneath me, my hands began to tremble, not from fear, not from adrenaline, but from the weight of silence finally lifting. I'd just flown the mission no one else dared to. And I hadn't just lived, I'd won. The flight back was both the longest and shortest of my life. Time stretched strangely when everything you did carried the weight of 1,200 calculations and one impossible gamble. I flew in radio silence for most of it. The steady hum of the engines and the faint whisper of wind past the fuselage, the only company I had. My mind wasn't on altitude or fuel ratios anymore. It was on the fact that 2 of the most senior military leaders in the Western world were alive, because I did what nobody else would. Raven 1. Came the voice from command as I neared the edge of U.S. airspace. You are cleared to return to Fort Vega. Tower standing by. Copy, I said, eyes fixed ahead. ETA 7 minutes. The sun was low on the horizon, spilling gold across the ocean. As Fort Vega's runway came into view, I noticed something unusual. People. A crowd had formed near the edge of the tarmac, not the usual collection of ground crews or idle officers. No, this group stood in ranks, shoulder to shoulder, with Colonel Doyle at the front, arms crossed, jaw tight. I landed clean, every motion muscle memory. The moment the wheels kissed concrete, I knew I'd be back where I belonged. Raven 1, taxi to Hangar 3. Crew ready to receive, came the call. As I rolled to a stop, the canopy opened with a hydraulic hiss, and I pulled off my helmet, letting the wind hit my face. A single breath. Then I climbed down. Colonel Doyle didn't speak right away. He just looked at me, eyes narrowed, like he still wasn't sure if what I'd done was brilliance or madness. Report, he said finally. Targets secured. Defenses neutralized. No friendly casualties, I said, standing at attention. Doyle gave a slow nod. 3 weeks ago, you were grounded for disobeying direct orders, Captain. Yes, sir. Today, that same disobedience brought home 2 generals. The crowd behind him said nothing. I could feel their stares, hear the unspoken questions buzzing in their minds. Was it luck? Was it genius? Was it both? You broke every protocol in the book, Doyle continued. You risked a multi-million-dollar aircraft and flew into a zone no tactician would approve. Yes, sir. And you made the right call. That part landed like thunder. He stepped forward. Effective immediately, your disciplinary review is closed. You're reinstated at full flight status, with commendation for extraordinary performance under extreme conditions. There was no applause, no cheering, just a quiet ripple of disbelief. After all, 3 weeks ago, I was the cautionary tale, the hotshot who flew too close to the edge. Now I was the reason 2 names didn't end up on memorial walls. But don't get too comfortable, Doyle added, his tone sharpening. You'll be leading tactical maneuver training for the squadron, using what you pulled off today as the foundation. We need more pilots who know how to bend the rules without breaking the mission. Understood, sir. And you'll be taking additional coursework in operational protocol. You still need to learn when not to go rogue. I smirked. Yes, sir. I'll brush up on my paperwork skills. See that you do? Dismissed. As I walked away, past the crew, past the squad, past the line of stunned lieutenants who had once avoided even meeting my eyes, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Purpose. This wasn't vindication. It wasn't glory. It was the moment between disgrace and legacy, the narrow gap where truth lived. You'd think saving 2 generals would buy you some breathing room, maybe a few days of rest. It didn't. By sunrise the next morning, I was already back inside briefing chambers, this time on the instructor side of the screen. Colonel Doyle had stuck to his word, grounded yesterday, teaching precision combat maneuvers today. And every face in that room knew exactly what I'd done. I pulled up the mission telemetry on the projector, a 3D overlay of the compound, the SAM sites, the canyon walls, and the impossible flight path I'd threaded through. No one spoke. Even the ones who'd written me off as a liability were leaning forward in their seats. This approach, I said, drawing a path through the gorge, was not sanctioned. It was designed on the fly. High speed, terrain masked, blind past 800 meters. No correction window. No room for error. But it worked because I studied the topography, winds, and defense layouts nonstop for 3 weeks while I was grounded. Major Sloan folded his arms. You realize 90% of pilots wouldn't make it past the first turn. I'm not asking you to copy it, I replied. I'm asking you to understand why I had to. I walked them through each split-second decision. When I dipped the throttle, how I handled the vector shift during the canyon dive, how I timed the munitions to detonate in overlapping bursts before enemy counterfire could lock on. One of the newer pilots, Lieutenant Kwan, raised a hand. Captain Reyes, did you have any backup plan? No, I said. If I missed by even 3 meters, the generals died. And I'd go with them. The silence that followed wasn't doubt, it was awe. After the session ended, I headed toward the flight line. My jet was being rearmed, repainted, and renamed. Someone had scrawled a new title across her nose cone in grease pencil. Rogue Angel. I raised an eyebrow. That's supposed to be flattering? I asked Tucker. The mechanic chuckled. Not my doing. Words spreading fast. I shook my head. I don't need a nickname. Too late, he said, tossing a rag over his shoulder. Pilot forums already lit up. Everyone wants to know how the grounded flyer just changed the playbook. He wasn't exaggerating. By midday, I was fielding quiet requests from other squadrons. Can we get her flight logs? Can she guest train in our unit? Was she really grounded before this? And the best part? Colonel Doyle wasn't stopping any of it. That afternoon, he called me into his office again. This time, the tone was different. Less judgment, more curiosity. You know, he said, when I grounded you, I was convinced you were dangerous. I was. And now, I'm still dangerous, I replied. But now I'm trained and trusted. He nodded slowly. We've got an opportunity, Reyes. You've proven what instinct and improvisation can accomplish. But if we can codify some of that, pass it on, we change how these missions are flown. Permanently. You want me to write a manual? I want you to write a doctrine. That hit differently. He didn't just want my story. He wanted my mind. I left his office with a tablet full of raw data and an unofficial assignment. Turn the chaos of my decision-making into something that could be taught. And in that quiet, between hangar doors and fuel lines, it finally clicked. I wasn't being punished anymore. I was being studied. It took 3 days to outline what they were asking for. 3 sleepless nights surrounded by telemetry, terrain models, enemy response patterns, and every hard-learned nuance that made the impossible flight work. I wasn't building a doctrine for style. This wasn't about flair or bravado. It was about decision-making at the edge of reason, when rules break down and instinct has to lead. I named the framework Adaptive Precision Strike Protocol, APSP. Sounded official, cold. But beneath it was blood, risk, and gut-level calculation. Doyle reviewed the first draft with no expression. This looks like it was written by someone who's been balancing a knife on a wire. That's about what it felt like, I said. You make a habit of that. Only when it saves lives. He nodded. Then we'll teach it. Carefully. Meanwhile, I was cleared for full operations again. My first flight back was a standard patrol over the North Pacific. Easy airspace, perfect weather, routine comms. But the moment I was airborne, something shifted. The chatter from control grew more cautious. Raven 1, confirm flight path, please. Raven 1, radar confirms clean airspace, unless you have something different. I smiled beneath my mask. I'd become the wild card. The pilot no one wanted to question, but no one wanted to underestimate either. Back at Fort Vega, things were changing too. Officers who used to ignore me in briefings now circled around after sessions, asking questions. Major Sloan, who once scoffed at my tactics, now sat in on every one of my simulations, nodding quietly, asking follow-ups. He never admitted I was right. He didn't have to. His presence said enough. The squadron began incorporating elements of my strike pattern into their drills. Not the whole canyon dive maneuver. None of them had the flight hours or nerve for that, but parts of it. Lateral thrust modulation, terrain masking under duress, improvised fire timing. And then came the invitation. A Pentagon attaché flew in with a sealed briefing envelope. The message was simple. Captain Reyes, you are to appear before the Joint Tactical Review Board in D.C. next week. Subject: integration of nonlinear combat protocols into frontline operations. Translation: they wanted me to help rewrite the rules I'd broken. I almost laughed. But it wasn't just vindication. It was responsibility. If we were going to change the game, we had to do it without turning every hotshot into a reckless gambler. What I did in that canyon couldn't become the new normal, but it could be the exception we finally learned to prepare for. That night, I stood alone in the hangar beside my jet. The sun was gone, the floodlights humming overhead, casting long shadows across the floor. I ran my hand across the cool metal of the cockpit. Didn't think we'd get another dance, I whispered. I thought back to those 12 soldiers in Yemen. The one still breathing because I chose instinct over orders. And the 2 generals, still alive, because I flew like every second counted more than my rank ever would. People always talk about heroism like it's a grand gesture. But sometimes, it's just doing the right thing when no one's watching and no one's willing to try. The Pentagon wasn't a place for improvisation. Every step echoed with regulation, every hall filled with uniforms that knew their place and made sure you knew yours too. I walked into the Joint Tactical Review Board chamber wearing my dress blues, ribbons sharp, hair neat, spine straight. But I wasn't here to impress. I was here to explain. 12 high-ranking officers formed the board, generals, analysts, senior strategists. They had the mission footage queued up already. I watched their eyes as they replayed it. My jet threading through Sharak Gorge, the missile strikes, the rescue op. Some leaned forward, others whispered. Then came the first question. Captain Reyes, were you aware at the time that your flight path deviated from all accepted safe approaches? Yes, sir. And you executed the attack pattern without pre-cleared simulation? Yes, sir. And yet, you succeeded in neutralizing 5 SAM units and enabling the extraction of both hostages? Yes, sir. A pause. Then another general leaned in. Captain, would you call this luck or skill? Neither, I said. It was preparation and judgment. I studied the terrain every day I was grounded. When the window opened, I knew what I had to do, and I trusted the jet to hold. They liked that. Not cocky, not apologetic, just fact. The board spent the next hour dissecting every detail, my speed modulation, altitude tracking, even my pulse rate during the canyon dive. They asked about the adaptive precision strike protocol. I explained the framework, the math, the mental checklist for when standard doctrine fails. But the moment that stuck, one of the generals, a hard-eyed woman named Thorne, looked up and said, Captain, you do realize that if this becomes doctrine, we're asking pilots to operate with permission to bend rules most of them haven't earned. I nodded. That's why it should only be taught to those who've already shown they understand the why, not just the how. Gatekeeping, she asked. Safeguarding, I replied. We can't make instinct a policy, but we can prepare the right minds to use it when the world goes sideways. There was silence after that. They didn't thank me. They didn't smile. But I knew I'd been heard. I flew home that night, back to Fort Vega. The air was cool. The coastlines glittered below, and the tower called me in like I'd never left. Raven 1, cleared to land. Welcome home, Captain. Back on the ground, Cara Monroe was waiting for me at the hangar. She handed me a tablet. What's this? I asked. Your next assignment. Advanced Aerial Warfare Symposium. You're on the docket. Featured speaker. I blinked. They want me to talk now. They want you to teach. Same thing. I leaned against the jet and exhaled. I hadn't set out to become anything more than a good pilot. But somehow, I'd become a threshold, a point where the military's caution met its future. That night, as the base quieted and the stars blinked into view, I walked the hangar alone. For 3 weeks, I'd stood on the sidelines wondering if I'd ever fly again. Now I was shaping the future of flight itself. They sent me to speak at an advanced tactics conference at White Sands. It wasn't my usual crowd. No flight suits, no roar of jets, just analysts, drone specialists, AI theorists, and a dozen other types who had never been in a cockpit. I stood in front of a projection screen showing my mission replayed from multiple angles. The canyon, the descent, the strikes, the rescue. I told them what the telemetry didn't. I told them about the silence in my helmet when the canyon closed in. The way my hands stopped shaking not because I was fearless, but because I knew there was no one else coming. I spoke about judgment, how no AI, no drone, no algorithm could have felt the wind shear that morning, or sensed the twitch in the jet when the canyon narrowed more than expected. One analyst raised his hand. Captain, wouldn't it be safer to let unmanned systems handle these kinds of risks? No, I said flatly. You can't program desperation. You can't automate conviction. That answer spread faster than the footage did. After the session, a colonel from an allied force pulled me aside. We've been following your doctrine. You've inspired some changes in our own training. Quietly, of course. I wasn't shocked. Military minds moved slow, but once the dam broke, the current swept far. Back at Fort Vega, I resumed training operations. My squadron's flight profiles now included optional Reyes routes, test runs for pilots confident enough to try unconventional paths. Not everyone passed. That was the point. I also began mentoring new pilots directly, those who showed not just talent, but instinct. One of them was Lieutenant Ash Khan, fresh out of advanced training, sharp as hell, and constantly asking the right questions. "Captain, how do you know when the risk is worth it?" "You don't," I told him. "But you feel when the cost of doing nothing is worse." Weeks passed. Then one night, long after most of the base had gone dark, I received a secure call from Colonel Doyle. "Reyes, we've got a situation. I'm sending coordinates to your terminal. Review them, then get to Hangar 3. I didn't ask questions. I'd learned by now that when Doyle's voice turned to gravel, it meant something off script. The data lit up my screen. Unmanned recon drones had gone dark near the Syrian border. Satellite footage revealed a convoy hit. Again, and this time, the passengers were high-level foreign intelligence liaisons. One American, one European. Captured. No movement since. A familiar problem. "What's the window?" I asked over the secure line. "For hours," Doyle replied. "We think they'll be moved across the border at dawn." I suited up. There was no ceremony this time. No crowd. No whispers. Just me and the hangar crew running final checks under floodlights. Chief Tucker was there, wrench in hand. "Same loadout?" he asked. "No. I want fast strike munitions. No delays." "You expecting resistance?" "Always." He slapped the side of the jet. "She's got your back." Again. As I climbed into the cockpit, I felt it. That electric stillness before a storm. I wasn't just flying a mission. I was becoming the protocol. The ghost they sent when nothing else worked. The jet roared to life beneath me, eager as ever. Tower cleared me before I even finished the request. Raven 1, good hunting. As I lifted off into the night, the stars above were sharp and quiet. The mission ahead was pure risk. But I didn't need applause. I didn't need redemption. I had a jet, a mission, and the will to see it through. And sometimes, that's all it takes. By the time I crossed into the operational airspace, dawn was bleeding into the horizon. The Syrian border below me was a scar of broken rock, scorched earth, and silence thick enough to taste. Overwatch fed me the latest. "Raven 1, you are now entering blackout zone. Communications will be limited. Last known location of the convoy is marked. Assume high hostiles and embedded SAM nests." "Copy. I'll be dark until exfil." There was no support this time. No rescue team waiting in the wings. No second jet covering my 6. Just me. I dipped low, skimming the terrain. My sensors tracked elevation and heat signatures, looking for signs of movement, power sources, engine warmth. Most of what I saw was dead ground. But near the edge of a dried riverbed, I caught it. 2 vehicles, camouflaged beneath a net of heat-resistant tarp. They weren't moving, but they weren't abandoned either. I activated the zoom on my HUD and saw the unmistakable figure of a guard pacing. The compound was makeshift, probably set up for short-term holding. But that meant they were planning to move soon. I marked the site and scanned the surrounding 3 kilometers. 2 mobile SAMs, both powered down but prepped for activation. Hidden under broken roofing, but not well. I'd seen this play before. Trap the first response, then fire when they think you're blind. I wasn't blind. I banked hard left, accelerated, and climbed just enough to get a lock. 2-button press. 2 sleek missiles dropped and vanished into the haze. Boom. Boom. No warnings. No time to react. The enemy scrambled like kicked ants. Figures running, pointing, firing blind at shadows. I dipped again, this time through a narrow valley I'd mapped from satellite recon. It gave me a straight shot at the holding site, but only if I held my approach at 40 feet. That's not flying. That's threading a bullet. The wind buffeted the jet. Dust kicked up from the canyon floor, and I was flying so low I could see my shadow chasing me along the rocks. No radar signature. No visual on me yet. Then I punched into the open and saw the compound dead ahead. Target acquired, I muttered. I locked in my payload. a compact set of smart rounds designed for non-lethal suppression. I needed those hostages alive. A quick burst of cannon fire destroyed the outer fence. One missile took out the supply truck, and a final pulse detonation scattered the fighters trying to regroup. My targeting software pinged the location of the hostages. Heat signatures clustered in the central shack. I keyed the comm. Overwatch, Raven 1. Packages located. Area clear. Send extraction team now. Silence. Right. Blackout. I hovered for a moment, watching the chaos settle into stillness. The enemy had no time to regroup. I didn't need to keep killing. I just needed to hold the line. Then, movement. 3 enemy trucks, further south, powering up and heading toward the compound fast. A counterattack. Maybe reinforcements. Maybe someone who realized what was at stake. I checked my fuel. Still good. Weapons. Limited. But enough. I adjusted vector and launched forward, meeting them before they crested the ridge. One by one, the trucks exploded in clean, efficient fireballs. I didn't celebrate. I didn't flinch. It was all timing. By the time I circled back, a small extraction helicopter team crept into the compound. They moved fast, collecting the hostages under cover of dust and fire. As they lifted off, one of the hostages, a man with a bleeding shoulder and torn uniform, looked up and raised a shaky salute. I dipped the jet's nose in reply. No comms. No words. Just 2 professionals acknowledging that death had been cheated, for now. I climbed altitude and punched a return course. There'd be no headlines. No parades. Probably not even a name in a report. But that didn't matter. Because somewhere tonight, 2 intelligence officers were going home. And once again, they were going home because I refused to fly by the book. When I touched down at Fort Vega, the tarmac was almost empty. No welcoming party. No command officers. Just the mechanics, waiting like they always did, tools in hand, tired eyes under floodlights. Chief Tucker met me by the ladder. You look like hell, Reyes. Feel worse, I said, climbing down. He handed me a bottle of water and nodded toward the hangar. They're already asking if the footage is being logged. You're becoming a trend. I let out a tired breath. It's not a trend. It's a necessity. Inside, the ops room was lit only by a few screens, most of the staff having turned in for the night. But Colonel Doyle was still there, alone, arms folded, watching the mission replay. You did it again, he said as I walked in. I shrugged. There wasn't time to wait. No, there wasn't. He didn't scold me. He didn't praise me either. He just gestured to a seat. The hostage you pulled out, Agent Juno Miles. She's the one who flagged the enemy's intel leak last year. We owe her. So I've been told, I said, sinking into the chair. He turned off the feed. You know, Reyes, every time you go out there, you rewrite more than flight paths. You're shifting how we define authority, instinct, even risk. I'm not trying to be a symbol, sir. I'm just trying to do what's needed. That's the problem, he said quietly. You're too good at it. I stared at him, unsure if it was a compliment or a warning. He continued, High Command is watching. Some of them are nervous. Your kind of flying can't be taught easily. And most brass hate what they can't control. I nodded. Let them be nervous. Maybe that's what they need. He looked at me for a long moment. You ever think about what this is doing to you? That question landed harder than expected. Truth was, I had. The sleepless nights. The constant pressure. The line I danced between daring and destruction. I'd begun to see it in the mirror. The faint weight in my eyes. The way I flinched when radios crackled too loud. How I hadn't really rested since my return. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Maybe I break later, I said. But until then, I fly. Doyle didn't argue. He just nodded, slow and solemn. You've got another symposium next week. NATO wants to hear how you planned that canyon strike. After that, you're scheduled to guest instruct with the Dutch. I smirked. So I'm a show pony now? No, he said. You're the razor they keep sheathed until nothing else works. I stood up, stretching my sore limbs. Then let's keep it sharp. As I left, I passed the hangar again. My jet stood in silence, freshly wiped down, gleaming even under dim light. Someone had updated the nose art again. The old rogue angel had been cleaned off. In its place, edge doctrine. Fitting. Not because I chased the edge, but because I lived on it. And if someone didn't teach others how to survive there, no one would. The day after the NATO symposium, I stood on a ridge overlooking the Fort Vega airfield. The wind was cold, biting. My flight suit rustled as I watched the sunrise stretch across the Pacific, bathing the runway in gold. Behind me, the base stirred awake. Radios crackled, boots hit pavement, jets screamed into dawn. Routine. Unchanging. Except everything had changed. In the past 6 weeks, I'd gone from grounded disgraced to mission leader, teacher, and doctrine author. The name, Edge Doctrine, was now printed on confidential flight manuals across multiple Allied forces. Tactical units ran simulations based on my runs. Other pilots, some younger, some more decorated, had begun asking questions I used to keep to myself. Questions like, what if the rules aren't enough? What if the only way out is through the fire? And for the first time, I was allowed to answer them. Colonel Doyle and I spoke less now. Not because of distance, but because the need for words had thinned. He trusted me. I knew the weight he carried. We'd both been changed by the mission that never should have worked. I still flew, constantly. Training sorties, quiet operations, even classified assist roles that didn't make it into the logs. But something about it felt different now. Heavier. Not in a bad way, but in the sense that every takeoff now carried echoes of those canyon walls, those strike zones, that first forbidden dive into chaos. I'd been in the sky when it cracked open, and I'd walked away from it, not unscathed, but defined. One morning, I found a letter in my locker. No return address. Just a folded message from one of the hostages, Agent Juno Miles. They told me you weren't coming. That no pilot could break the airspace. But I watched the sky tear open anyway. I didn't see your face. Just a shadow. Just salvation. If you ever wonder whether it mattered, it did. I'm alive because of you. And so are the agents I'll now train. Thank you. I didn't keep the letter. I didn't need to. I carried its truth in every flight, every maneuver I taught, every time I looked into the eyes of another young pilot standing at the edge of their own impossible mission. Not every story gets told. Not every canyon dive makes headlines. Some are whispers and debriefs, footnotes and reports, scars behind eyes. But we who fly them, we remember. We remember what it feels like to have one chance and no safety net. To trust metal and instinct more than orders. To break the sky because someone had to. I'm not a hero. I'm not a rogue. I'm Captain Eliza Reyes, United States Air Force. And when the rules end, I begin.